Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a post on medical diagnostic imaging, leukemia, and black holes. Medical diagnostic imaging is highly dependent on the operator because whenever a radiologist looks at a set of MRI or CAT scan images, he or she will adjust the contrast and select a handful of images to tell a story about what he thinks is going on inside of a patient. Often this story is influenced by what the doctor who prescribed the MRI has written. Since we often see the things we are told to see, doctors have learned to be careful about diagnosis and make sure that they use several independent sources of evidence. This is all stuff that my dad told me. He was a neuroradiologist. And if you only use a single diagnostic test for a disease, it is very easy to end up with a false positive result and see disease where nothing exists. For example, a doctor might mistake a blurry spot on an image for cancer, or he might filter an image based on the diagnosis he wants to see. He wants to see such and such a percentage of blockage or stenosis so that he can operate. False positives are reduced by using multiple independent diagnostic machines and blood tests. If they all agree with the symptoms reported by the patient, and if you are lucky enough that those who performed the tests were not influenced by what they thought they should measure or what they were afraid would be measured by someone else, making them look bad, when the surgeon shows up, he won't cut you open and find nothing to remove. If medical professionals don't understand the necessity of having multiple independent, unbiased measurements, people die. But this is not the case in the field of astronomy and physics, and I've written several articles about this, which I encourage you to click on the link below and check those out. So if you're thinking, this article has no substance, go down below and click the links. You will find practically a book-length material on these issues. If, for example, an Event Horizon Telescope black hole astronomer combines blurry images from a bunch of different telescopes in order to create a picture of something that he believes should exist in unimaginably distant space, nobody's going to die, at least not immediately. If a LIGO, laser or interferometer gravitational waves observatory astronomer, filters out a blip buried in noise and attributes it to black holes colliding in a distant star system instead of to something more mundane and terrestrial in origin, nobody's going to die, at least not immediately. We all die eventually, but some of us may realize that we've wasted our lives measuring things that do not exist. We also might realize that a corruption of the scientific method within physics might infect other, more critical disciplines, like medicine. Many ex-physicists go on to do data analysis for medical research or banking. This sort of confusion arises when astronomers believe that directly adding together uncorrelated errors is a valid way to reduce or hide a timing error of your measurement, or that organizing randomly scrambled data according to a criteria called weirdness or deviations from expectations is a valid scientific method. It isn't. Or if a researcher believes that there is no such thing as a noise floor when you can take more data. So this last point confuses people because they might think about how a pendulum oscillates randomly about a central point and how if you average over enough measurements, you will get a better measurement of that point relative to the fixed point holding the pendulum. If you take enough measurements, the difference between the relative positions of the fixed point and the measured point should go to zero in an ideal classical world. In the real world, one might imagine the fixed point and the measured point wobbling around relative to everything else, as though they were sitting on a boat in the sea. The measured point and the fixed point may always be connected by a straight line, but That line may have no fixed relationship to anything else. In quantum mechanics, this is called intrinsic uncertainty, but in astronomy, people act as though this uncertainty does not exist, because it doesn't exist in general relativity. In the real world, the Earth is moving relative to the star you want to measure, and you cannot anticipate all of these movements or distinguish them from how light bends as it travels between the star and the Earth. Even if you have perfect equations governing the motion of an object without perfect knowledge of initial conditions, there will always be some uncertainty about the predicted motion. Nothing is truly stationary relative to anything else, and this motion will define a noise floor, below which you simply can't measure anything. It's like quantum mechanics. Far too many experiments in physics today are attempting to measure things that are below the noise floor, and they are doing this without using any of the basic principles of the scientific method. Strange things happen when medical professionals try to do this as well and measure things that are below the noise floor of their measurement devices. They may try to combine measurements to see things that cannot be seen with an individual measurement, and sometimes this appears to benefit the patient, but sometimes it does not. It is possible for a group of measurements that are all below the noise floor to give false positive results that lead to a positive diagnosis, just to err on the side of caution in case of future malpractice lawsuits. Of course, if you understand the limitations imposed by a noise floor, using multiple measurement methods to cross-check a hypothesis is clearly better than relying on a single measurement device. But even then, people can make mistakes when they combine uncertain, biased measurements and overestimate their certainty. That was what I was thinking as I read this story about a perfectly healthy man who was diagnosed with leukemia and then blasted full of chemo, leading to years of trauma and recovery from something that was probably never going to become a problem. He was an extremely healthy, young-looking, energetic 50-year-old man who wasn't concerned that he was sick. His lymph nodes looked fine. He went in for a routine checkup. He had a white blood cell count that was just below the normal range, 2 when 4 to 12 is normal. He was given a referral to a blood specialist just to be sure that nothing was wrong with him. The blood specialist got a bunch of inconclusive results and sent him to get a marrow test to cover her ass in case he had leukemia, even though he had no leukemia symptoms. He just had a strangely low number of white blood cells. The marrow test yielded an inconclusive result that indicated that he might have minimally residual disease, otherwise known as MRD. It means that you might someday get leukemia, but you might not. They didn't tell him that next-generation sequencing indicates false positive MRD results and should only be used to predict prognosis after cancer treatment in patients with leukemia. As in, the test shouldn't be used to diagnose leukemia. It should only be used to estimate the recovery of people who were treated for leukemia. So this guy goes to a hotshot doctor, believing that he has leukemia, and this doctor offers to enroll him in a clinical trial designed to remove any traces of this residual disease, essentially offering to test an intensive chemo treatment program on him for a future problem that he might not develop. The hotshot doctor benefits from enrolling people in his study, and this guy looks like a good sport. He volunteers to get blasted with chemo and put into isolation while his body recovers its immune system. When he is released from the hospital, he requires blood transfusions that make him sick. He is told that after all of the trauma he's been through, he still tests positive for MRD, or minimally residual disease. They didn't tell him that the more methods used to determine MRD, the more the result tends to become negative. As far as I could tell, he may have never had leukemia. He was just a healthy guy with a somewhat low white blood cell count. The story has a happy ending. He recovers and runs a marathon. Yay! But the chemo made him look 20 years older, and he went through a medical hell that might have been unnecessary. He may have been preemptively treating a disease he was never going to get. After reading this story, I looked up the diagnostic criteria for leukemia and found that it is not a disease that you can catch in its early stages through blood tests. It has to present through symptoms, as in night sweats, fevers, infections, tiredness, weakness, bruising, paleness, bleeding, etc. He had none of these symptoms. Recall that before all of this started, this guy was as healthy as anyone could be, yet he was diagnosed with a leukemia precursor, MRD, based on a blood test that produces false positive results. A series of doctors who didn't want to miss a diagnosis gave him a diagnosis, MRD that might become leukemia, because the penalties for missing a leukemia diagnosis were far worse for them than overdiagnosing and treating leukemia. They were protecting themselves rather than the patient. I also looked up one of the sample analysis methods, and it involves taking blood, staining it with fluorescent antibody conjugated, and then they pass a stained cell suspension through a laser beam, which is then done, a data analysis is done called gate cell population of interest. And I looked at these data sets and I thought, how on earth are you concluding anything from that? I thought, ouch. This looks like something that a physicist designed. And when I see that in the physics community you have evidence of people who do not understand the scientific method, I think, one of those guys could have gone out and designed this medical test, and people could die as a result. So I am not a doctor, I just have a physics background, and I hope that nobody takes my advice in their own medical care or in the care of their child. But I do detect a systematic problem here, and the problem is over-reliance on tests that are not as reliable as those who use them believe. It's sort of just people trusting the system rather than trusting their own basic logical facilities, which you need. Common sense to survive. If you or your child are clearly sick, you should get help from a doctor. But this leukemia story bothered me because he was perfectly healthy until the doctors told him that he was sick and gave him an invasive cancer treatment. This faith in the medical system is quite similar to the faith people have in measurements of gravitational waves or black holes, or the faith they have in the FDA and in dermatologists' recommendations to use sunscreen. We learned recently that sunscreen goes through your skin and the blood-brain barrier and stays in your body for weeks at toxic levels. What if all of this faith is misplaced? The system is rotten, and we should be working very hard to figure out which parts of the system can be salvaged and be trusted. Do we need to turn back the clock and start doing science and medicine in the same way it was done back in the 1950s? It seems that something went wrong in the past 70 years. We overshot the mark, and I think it was our overzealous faith in technology. So I have a whole list in the post below of examples of where we have overshot the mark, and links to those articles backing up those claims. So I'll just read through them really quickly. Wear sunscreen. Oh wait, sunscreen goes through the skin and the blood-brain barrier. It will poison you after one application. Unhealthy levels can be measured in your blood for weeks thereafter. Disinfect everything with triclosan. Rub it on your baby. Oh wait, triclosan goes through the skin and the blood-brain barrier, and it will poison you. In studies done in the 1960s, rubbing triclosan on baby monkeys made them mentally retarded. But the brilliant scientists decided that it was because the monkeys had put their hands in their mouths and eaten the triclosan. Get surgery to straighten your spine. Ouch. Oh wait, most of those operations fail and cause extreme pain and unnecessary suffering to the young girls who are treated in this fashion, and it's that these most invasive operations are done on girls because our spines tend to curve more than boys do because of the estrogen in our system makes our joints all flexible. Get gadolinium injected to improve the contrast on your MRI. Oh wait, gadolinium gets permanently stuck in your brain and eyes. They can measure it in cadavers. They don't know what it does to the brain. They just assumed that it didn't do anything, even though it accumulates clearly. Put boron and fluoride in everything. Oh wait, we might not have understood as much as we thought about what they do to the human body. Boron is banned from all cosmetics products in Europe, but it's still in all the products in the US. Get a heart operation to reduce the risk that you will have a heart attack. Oh wait, you would have been better off leaving your heart untouched by a surgeon's knife. Get routine blood work. You might get diagnosed with leukemia when you were healthy. Become a physicist. Oh wait, you might end up spending your life measuring things that don't exist. Caveat emptor. Experts are often stupid. So what are you going to do? Some people want to create AI tools to help individual patients evaluate their own situation rather than relying on a bunch of doctors who might possibly be idiots or corrupted by their incentives. So I link here to a post from Less Wrong, a community of AI experts, and where they wrote, some of our founding inspirations were the work of Gerd Gigerenzer and Atul Gawande, who showed that medical errors were the cause of many deaths, and that doctors tend to be statistically illiterate, and that systematizing tools like checklists and statistical prediction rules save lives. And I think that's true as long as the people designing these checklists have a very strong understanding of the scientific method. And if they are educated by certain subsets of the physics community, I'm not sure that's the case. I do feel sorry for medical professionals who are fighting the coronavirus, and I wish them the best for themselves and for their families. I do not feel sorry for the medical industry as a whole and what's happened to it over the past decades. Just like the physics community, I think it needs a hard reset and regrounding in foundational principles. When I see experiments like LIGO and EHT, these black hole experiments and gravitational wave experiments, given top billing in the science media, I see this as a symptom of a much wider problem with people mistaking faith in science for an understanding of the scientific method. Consider that all of the following physics experiments are used as training facilities for the people who go on to interpret data from fields as diverse as agriculture, economics, and medicine. So I'm just going to list off some physics experiments, and I want you to ask yourself if it sounds like the people conducting those experiments have their head in the clouds or if they've lost their heads completely. So we have gravitational wave observatories claiming to measure the change in distance between the Earth and Alpha Centauri with an accuracy of the width of a hair. Neutrino observatories claim to measure virtually unmeasurable particles, and when one of their fiber optic cables got loose, they got confused and thought that the virtually unmeasurable particles traveled faster than light. Higgs particles cannot exist if neutrinos exist, but that has not stopped scientists at CERN from measuring the Higgs, because when your apparatus measures noise, you can filter out whatever you want to see if you are good at slicing and dicing data. Astronomers studying the properties of blobs of light in the sky have come up with some rather strange explanations for what they have seen. Even when multiple explanations for an observation are possible, they tend to focus on one. That's not really scientific. Data scientists have combined images from telescopes to construct images of things that cannot be seen with a single telescope. They threw away the images that did not look like what they wanted to see, which was a black hole. Satellite gadgeteers have attempted to measure the noise floor of empty space by shooting a satellite as far away from Earth as they could. They put a heat source on the satellite to calibrate the measurement and measured that the noise floor of empty space looked like a perfect calibration curve. Balloon builders attempted to measure the signature of cosmic movements taking place at the beginning of time, but then they realized that they were measuring dust floating around in the sky. I mean, it just goes on. Laser experts attempted to take videos of the processes within bacteria by using short pulses of X-rays from billion-dollar machines. But the pictures are no better than what you can get with a tabletop microscope. Fusion power dreamers have created containers for lightning in a bottle, and they think that with fast enough control loops, they can control that lightning, even though it jumps around at the speed of light. Climatologists use billion-dollar supercomputers to construct simulations of the climate in an effort to figure out how sensitive the climate is to changes in the concentration of carbon dioxide. When their sensitivity estimates fail to show predictive power, they just change the sensitivity factor and continue to claim that their model has predictive power. Planetary systems experts have created a software package that is so easy to use that a 17-year-old was able to discover a new planet during his summer internship. The software detects small wobbles in the light from individual stars. Sometimes people measure things just because they want to. Cosmologists won a Nobel Prize for telling everyone that they had measured the accelerated expansion of the universe. Several years later, it was shown that they had made a basic mistake by forgetting to take the motion of the Earth into account in their calculation. They were measuring the acceleration of the Earth, and the universe isn't expanding at an accelerated rate after all. Okay, so that list should tell you that there's a problem in this community. Really, there is. And I think we need to fix this problem before the quants, which are often ex-physicists, before they create another banking crisis or before they convince another doctor to use their software package to make decisions about a kid's leukemia diagnosis. So I guess you can consider me a physics whistleblower. I come from that community. I spent 20 years within it. And when my trance broke, I could then identify all of the craziness going on. And I hope that this helps someone change their course in a way that will help improve the system. Thank you for watching. Until next time.